right. Welcome to another episode of Comp and Coffee. I'm excited today to be joined by Vicky and Bill. And I'm Russ. And today we're going to talk a little bit. Well, before we get into our topic, Vicky, it's on the cusp of fall/winter. What is the weather like over there in the UK? Are you getting any kind of exciting fall/early winter vibes going on there?
Well, I went out today and it was so cold. I had to come back in to get my woolly hat. So we're definitely hitting winter here in Edinburgh. And the leaves are all coming down, which is always a sad.
Yeah, is it gone from the pretty colors? Do you guys get the pretty colors there? And
yeah, we do.
Brown, crinkly stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're not, Vermont or New Hampshire, but we, up in the Highlands, we can get some amazing colors. But as soon as you get any kind of wind and rain, which we got earlier in the week, it all just comes down, and then we're back to the kind of bare trees and cold. So yay, but exciting. Here in Edinburgh, we're having our Christmas market again, and the bar opposite has just built a ski chalet outside.
So do you have actual skiing there? Like, is there you get enough snow to ski?
It's just no. On top of like Glencoe and like some of the higher mountains in the Highlands, we can get snow occasionally, and on dustings, but we're not.
It's more of a pretend you're at a chalet and enjoy some fine alcohol.
On my street, it's literally just so that people can sit outside and be warm.
Okay,
in a hut.
That's fair. I like it. What about you, Bill? So we just had here in New Hampshire, we just had our first sort of slushy semi-snow evening, which is not at all fun. It sounds like, so you got those brown leaves on the ground. Now they're all covered with a thin, half-inch layer of just snow slush. So you take your dog out for a walk and it's just a mess. So we're in that phase, which is the not so fun part of fall. So that's where we are. Bill, in Boston, do you guys get any snow, or is it just rain?
It's just rain. It's pretty gray and dreary out. I think there was snow in central or western Mass, but just the same thing you're talking about, Russ, just, dusting. But, it's only November. It's coming.
Well, that is par for the course in November. And you know what else is happening in November, Bill? We just had some new pay legislation come into effect in various places across the country. And what's interesting, and we talked about this on the show a little bit before, but with these new paid legislation rules coming into effect, at state levels and in city levels here in the United States, all across the country, and it seems like November 2022 is sort of the time everybody's jumping in on this. We've been asked to talk to a lot of different media outlets. We've had some of our folks here, like Lulu and others, talking a lot about this, and so a lot of people are asking, what's this going to do to compensation? What is this doing to how companies pay folks? And so we thought it might be kind of fun to talk about this, given the change in season is also sort of driving some changes in what we have to do in our job postings. How's that for a segue, Bill? How'd I do?
That was very impressive.
Excellent.
Yep.
All right. It's not a professional segue. You mentioned you did it. That's the problem. So Vicky, what's your perspective on this? I know we just had a couple things. What just happened in New York? Let's get everybody all sort of excited here.
Yeah, so New York is the first really big place Colorado was very big, and it was the first place to put this in as legislation. But New York obviously has a lot more big companies. And so it's the first kind of big test of the pay legislation, pay transparency legislation. And basically it means that any employers with 4 or more employees within New York City have to post for applicants and for internal and external postings, minimum and maximum salary that you believe in good faith at the time of posting that you're willing to pay for the job. And so obviously in January, California is coming in as well. So that's going to be another kind of big hit. But at the moment, we've got New York, Colorado, and some other places around the country.
Yeah, and the New York one just happened, in November 1st, right? So it's very
November 1st, yeah.
And I think I saw, Bill, this is sort of fun. I think the language of the law is such that if you if you are a company that does some business in New York and you're hiring for any job that could be done in New York City, which of course with remote work means pretty much any job now, you're kind of like, if you're anywhere, if you're a company that's any business at all anywhere near New York City, you're kind of stuck. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, it's tricky. I mean, I'm no lawyer, even if I pretend to be one sometimes. I'm sure there are companies that are going to try to skirt that issue. I don't know if people remember so long ago, 2 years ago almost, when Colorado started this, and companies literally exempted people from Colorado from applying for jobs.
Right.
Saying, this job can be done anywhere except the state of Colorado, because including companies that had employees or offices in Colorado, exactly for that reason, because they weren't complying with the law. They couldn't figure out how. And those were some pretty big companies that did that. And they weren't, as far as I know, they weren't doing it to be mean or malicious or, even really to make a statement. They were doing it because they couldn't comply. And so the way they chose to comply in the short term was to say, this doesn't apply to you, Colorado. Coloradoans need not apply. And that's not what people are trying to do. That's not what the law is trying to do. I will say, could just sort of add two small things to what you and Vicky were just saying. One is, it's not the law, it's a bunch of different laws. Each one of them is different. Mm-hmm. I just want to make sure people realize that the California law, the New York law, the Colorado law, they're similar, saying lots of the same things, but they are not the same law. And this is that nightmare that we all deal with as states start adopting their own versions of laws before, federal law takes over. And there are also a bunch of cities. Well, New York City is one, but Ithaca, Westchester County in New York, Jersey City. So, it's just sort of popping up in different places.
Yeah, as you said
that. Yeah, and
go ahead, Vicky. Sorry.
I was going to say that's a good point, because the one thing that's really different between them is the penalties. So you have to be careful as to determine which law you're going to come under, because some of them have bigger teeth than others.
Yeah, I was just going to say, this suddenly gave me the chills as I realized this is basically minimum wage rules, which are different in every county, city, state, town. But now it's more complicated, because now there's all these different rules of how you post the salaries, what they do, one thing, and I kind of want to figure out, I think we all have to sort of start figuring out what's the I don't think it's the lowest common denominator, the highest common denominator, but what's the thing you can do that you're 98% confident that'll comply with all these different rules, right? Is it, do you feel like it's pretty much just as long as we have a salary range on there, in good faith, more about that in a second, a good faith salary range on there, we're taking care of this for most of these, or are some of them a little more nuanced than that?
I think that's a good first step, Vicky. I don't know if you have any, deeper thoughts. I mean, the point of this is really to sort of take a first step into transparency and provide some, useful information about what's a reasonable range to expect when you apply for a given job at a given company in one of these locations. But I don't really know the answer.
I agree. I mean, there's some that are, so there's one that I saw that had like a calculator, a link to a calculator instead of the number on the posting, which I'm not sure is fully compliant. But then you put in where you were basically, and it told you what the range was, because obviously it was a remote job and they had more than one location. But I do think the other option is to kind of try and cover all bases. Minimum wage is a really interesting thing. You have to kind of basically say, this is a minimum wage job wherever you are type,
Right.
So I don't know whether you have to put all the numbers or whether you can just state that. But yeah, I mean, that,
well,
I think. Go for it.
Go ahead, Vicky. Sorry. I was just going to say that. Sorry, I didn't mean to step on you, but if anybody who's making these transparency laws is listening, please don't go the route of minimum wage. Because we've heard from many of our sort of large national employers that have locations in many, many cities and many, many states, is like they cannot keep up with minimum wage. They can't do it at a corporate level. They have to have the individual locations manage the minimum wage because it's just too many different government entities setting the rules. And so they can't do it from the top. And that's just bad legislation, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. And it's whether or not we get a sort of overarching sort of federal like law that comes in that kind of, takes all the sort of best bits and sort of puts them together. Right. I don't know. What you don't want is how the minimum wage has happened, whereas the federal minimum wage is so low because they don't really need to do anything about it because everyone else is doing it.
Right. Well, one thing I wanted to ask too, and thinking about this, a couple of things I want to get into what we should be doing as comp professionals and HR professionals to sort of get ahead of this. We talked about a little bit this before, but we have new challenges involved with all this, right? Like the idea that this could be very different from state and location to location. So now we've got that complexity. We also have the complexity of, gee, is this if I can't get away with a calculator, and depending on the law, maybe you can, maybe you can't. If you can get away with a calculator, then you can still have geodifferentials, you can still have other things. But if you can't get away with a calculator, and you're a remote first or remote only organization or even a hybrid organization, now you've got a pretty complicated situation here that you got to kind of figure out your range for. And some of the companies are trying to solve this by having very broad ranges, but that's kind of going up against the good faith. And there's been some kind of funny, accidental, or maybe on purpose range settings we've seen already that are kind of humorous. Vicky, do you have any examples of some of the ones that are kind of been cited out there as sort of like the oops, someone was having some trouble there?
Yeah, well, so the famous one that went around on the first day was Citibank, which was 0 to 2 million, which we think was probably more of a mistake of some kind of code, but was obviously somewhere in between that was fine. We've also got like Wells Fargo. There was an article in Fortune. Wells Fargo was 173,000 to 359,000, which I thought was
that's quite a range.
It's quite a range. And technology engineer from 73 to 152. There's some that are interesting. There was one, and I've forgotten the company, where they said, well, actually, this job title covers more than one salary range. And so the range is really large, depending on sort of your level, which felt like a slight cop-out, is whether or not it's kind of, so the job is going to so the person is going to determine the job rather than the job determine the person, if that makes sense.
Well, that's one of the things that I, years ago, on this broadcast, even I predicted, it's like everyone knows I love accountants, as an example. You can post the job as accountant, and that could take you from, $40,000 a year to, I don't know, $250,000, $300,000 a year. That would be a perfectly legitimate job as accountant. It has 7 levels. And it's sort of like that's what the range is for that job. And as people come in, as Vicky said, it's where the person fits in on this continuum. And I mean, that's providing no real information for anyone, but it is, sort of in compliance with the probably the letter of the law. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but not really the spirit of the law. And I think that there are companies that are going to be doing that because they're going to want to have the flexibility, and it's like, I'm guessing a large number of people listening here have applied for a job and ended up in a different version of the job than the one that they thought they were applying for. And that's sort of what we're talking about is, you're coming into you're looking at a description which is very, synthesized, boiled down, basic bullet points, and in talking with the potential future employer, you discover you have some skills that weren't in the job description. They need those skills, but they need them somewhere else. And you sort of move along or move to a different level or a different version of the job. And so narrow, like if the range is too narrow, you could alienate people who are looking for a higher salary than what the range allows. And if it's too broad, you're not actually providing any information. So it's no change. I'm not overly impressed with the value of what these ranges are providing. Happy to go more into that if you want.
Well, no, I do, but I think there was hearing two different things that you guys brought up. One was, the geography challenge, which is one thing we talked about that earlier, and now we're talking about the fact that your job title has to be more granular and more specific for these to be realistic ranges, right? So, in other words, you can't just say, "Hey, we're hiring software engineers, salary commensurate with experience," and we'll take, associate entry-level software engineers off this job posting, and we'll take senior engineers, and we'll just, if we get a guy with 20 years, great. We'll pay them X, and if we get a person that's just out of college, we need a lot of software engineers, so we'll take who we can get. We'll just pay you commensurate with your experience. You can't do that anymore, clearly, or you could, but the range would be so large that, you might risk some of those states and some of the laws having to defend it or, be audited or whatever they're going to do. So maybe it sounds to me like if you want to have things like, and this kind of goes back to our best practices, right? Because if you think about in your organization, how you build your job architecture, how you build your salary structures, if your organization where we like to be lean and mean with our job titles, and then we just handle years of experience, is how people go up. When I got a problem because job postings are based on job title still at the moment. So now you actually kind of need to think differently about your architecture. You have to go in and actually have different levels of job titles in your organization. If you already got that, you're halfway there. But now you got to also have, if you're going to stick with geocodes and, geodifferentials, now you got to also make sure you have good geographic differentiation, or really restrict those job postings to be very specific roles at very specific years of experience with very specific geographies. What's your reaction on this, Vicky? I know you're a huge proponent of well thought out job architecture. Does job architecture sort of spring to mind as you're thinking about ways to solve this?
Yeah, it does. I mean, I am a fan of job architecture, but that's really because come out of kind of my experience with pay transparency, pay equity. I mean, I used to be a big fan of like hardly any job architecture. Everyone was a consultant and you just kind of, played them, or everyone was at similar level, like flatter structures. But I just can't see now how you could cope with those, because you're going to just get people have to understand how they're being paid nowadays, because they can now look at these ranges. And I sort of feel like it's more important for companies to be able to say, this is how we pay people, and therefore to work out kind of the structures. And if you're going to work out structures, you have to have job architecture, because you need to know kind of how levels you've got and how many like job families and how you're going to structure your organization so that you can work out how to pay people. And so I kind of see it going back down that route again. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. I feel like it's the right thing to do. I just feel like the flexibility is going to be less.
But Bill, what's your reaction to that as the compensation ombudsman here? You've seen both sides of that coin. Do you agree with Vicky on that? And or how do you think organizations should react from an architecture structures point of view? Does this really impact that?
I mean, it's funny. I think that, I'm going to go back a step and say that part of the challenge here is that like these things are coming, they're like this whole transparency and job posting regulation thing started, years ago. And I don't think the people that were proposing that actually contemplated the geographic problem, in part because the geographic problem didn't really exist. The whole idea of like the vast majority of employees or the majority of employees being able to work remotely either most of the time or all of the time. It didn't exist when these conversations started. So the idea that somebody could, sort of cherry pick, I'm going to apply for a job and I'm going to work in New York, and then I get the high end of the range, and then I'm going to move to Montana, and not tell anybody, and it's sort of like, well, why are we paying geographic differentials? And I know we've had this discussion before, but I think the more times that question comes up, the more scrutiny the concept gets, and the more likely we're going to see a watering down of geo differentials, because two things are going to happen. It's like, why does, trying to think of a company, but why does a national company who has a remote workforce care whether you live in New York or Montana, just to use the two states I picked earlier? It doesn't cost me any more as an employer to have you in one or the other, apart from some like taxes or whatever. But there's no substantial difference in my cost. Whereas if I had an office or had a storefront, then I'm paying rent in New York or paying rent in Montana, and that's a very different cost structure. And then the other thing is, and I think the jury's still way, way out on this one, is if people are actually migrating to, lower cost of living places for their remote work, and I don't want to reveal any, big secrets, but those lower cost of living places are going to become more expensive. As more people move there. And so like the geographic differentials are going to sort of swing, closer, so that, the New York and Bay Area rates are going to go down relative to the, to sort of the Midwestern and, lower rural rates, the traditionally lower rural rates. And so, there will be a balancing out. So anyway, I think there's a whole lot of cleaning up to do and to see how everything settles out here. But I think this is a big challenge, and it's, it's job security, but a headache at the same time.
Yeah, for sure. And I think so. I think the one of the things I think that's interesting about the geodifferential thing, I was thinking about this as you mentioned it, Bill, like, I wonder if these lawmakers, well, the answer is probably no, but I wonder if these lawmakers are far-sighted enough to think about the idea that, well, hey, if we're going to move to national averages, the national average isn't going to be what you pay in Silicon Valley and New York, right? It's going to be somewhere lower than that, but higher than what we pay in the, the middle of Montana for a software developer, for example. Doesn't that mean if I have a higher cost of living in New York City and all the jobs I now apply for pay less than what they used to, it's incentivizing me to leave New York City. But as a New York City lawmaker, that means I'm losing taxes, right? Like one of the big changes that happened post-COVID, right? I happen to be a New Hampshire resident. New Hampshire has no sales tax. PayScale has an office in Massachusetts. So because I go to Massachusetts to work, it's a place of business, I pay Massachusetts sales tax. If PayScale were to go to full remote with no offices, I no longer pay Massachusetts income tax. Sorry. I may no longer pay any Massachusetts income tax. So all these sorts of rules will have income impact on the government. And I do wonder, how they're thinking through some of this stuff, especially the geography stuff, which is really fascinating. I want to jump back, though, to what you were talking about, Vicky, with the job architecture and the structures, because it seems to me like that's the place, as all this stuff plays out, right? It does seem to me that if I were a betting person, I would bet that, geodiffs, I agree with you, Bill and Vicky, that the geodiff thing is going to start to become less and less of a thing over time. And I also think, and I used to see the simplicity and the elegance of very light structures and basically job-based range sort of structures where you're thinking about each job. But now with pay equity concerns, pay fairness concerns, pay transparency concerns, I'm shifting my thinking back towards your thinking, Vicky, which is, man, having much more well thought through structures, grade-based structures, for example, or banded structures that really take like work and group it together. So you can honestly say, yes, people in protected classes, I'm going to kind of a little past pay transparency here, but stick with me. So people in protected classes and that are doing the same job as people who are not are getting paid the same or roughly the same level of responsibility, regardless of whether they're doing X or doing Y. There's that, but then also those bands have to be granular enough that you can take that job and post it. And if you ever get audited, the ranges in your structures are roughly close to the ranges you're putting on your job postings, which really means none of these, and this is why the companies are struggling. Very few companies have their structures that well thought out, that granular, that specific that they can immediately just grab it and go. It's not like companies are trying to be, I think someone mentioned at the beginning, it's not that they're trying to be dishonest here or play games with the new laws. It's literally they're not in a position to really do that yet. They have to rethink all their structures. So isn't our first step to really start jumping into our structures strategy and tackle that from the ground up almost? What's your
yeah. I feel that one of the main things that concerns me about this is if companies are just going, well, I don't have any of this, so what I'm going to do is look at the market rate and do a sort of 10% either way, which is like a good strategy. Like it's kind of fair. It's probably what they were doing anyway before. But then you've got employees seeing that, and then you've got pay compression issues. You've got like inequity because people are seeing. So like the one thing you have to do is look internally at what your range is, what you're paying at the moment for this before you can do anything. The best thing is then to sort of start building this architecture so that you can be like, okay, this job that's coming in, even if it's a new job that doesn't have anyone in, we know where it fits in the organization. We can see who those like other jobs that are substantially similar, like what they're paying, and we can choose a range out of that. I don't think companies are going to necessarily go for a full salary range because usually the job that they're hiring into is generally slightly lower. You don't necessarily want to pay someone at the top of the range when they come in because they've got nowhere to go. So they might end up doing a smaller range, but I do think that companies have to start moving to being more structured so that when their employees or their prospects or their competitors, customers, whoever, all these people are going to see this, are saying, okay, tell me how you pay people and why those people are being paid as they are. You need to be able to answer that question rather than it being a bit fuzzy, which is what we've had for many years.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think, so what are some things, how can we start, like, what are some of the things, Bill, what's your reaction to sort of that? And what are some things you would think, I think there's the psychology, because Vicky, you sort of mentioned like the range everyone's seeing, right? So the employees are seeing all these numbers, the prospects are seeing these numbers, your competitors are seeing these numbers, even your customers are seeing these numbers. You sort of mentioned that you want to keep the top of the range probably a little lower than actual top because people need room to grow. That also seems to make sense for internal pay equity because hopefully some people in the seat now feel like they're getting paid more than the new person, unless the new person is clearly coming with a lot more experience. You're kind of like, hey, they don't know the ropes yet. Why are they getting paid as much or potentially more than me? But at the end of the day, Bill, what's the psychology of this? The end of the day, everybody just, even though everybody's posting ranges on this stuff, everybody just looks at the highest number, right? And so how much psychological consideration should we be doing to how we list these things and what we share?
I'd be very interested to hear what like a social psychologist has to say about this, because as an employer, I think of it as the absurd ranges actually solve a lot of these problems because you can meet the demands. Nobody thinks they're going to work, like, not nobody, I guess. Virtually no one thinks they're going to go work at Citibank and as a teller and get paid $2 million a year. So you don't anchor yourself to the high number when it's so much higher than you will ever get. And the same is they don't expect to get paid zero. But I do think that some of this stuff is, I think we have to be careful. Like at most companies, well, how do I say this? I think there is this continuum, but smaller companies tend to do whatever they need to do to just get it done. Like we need to post a job, we need to put a range on it. And there's probably some harried, HR generalist sitting there going, well, what do I put as the low and the high? And they talk to the hiring manager and says, well, I can't go higher than this. And, I don't want to go lower than that. And so they basically just, do it. Each one is, an ad hoc bespoke range associated with the job, which is actually a pretty good way of doing it. Not a good use of time or consistency, or not going to provide consistency, but it's a reasonable, good faith estimate of what the range for that job is. And bigger companies have more sophistication, they have more tools, they have more rules, they're more likely to have something that looks like an architecture or ranges for the job, so they have a better starting point. But I think trying to figure out the strategy of how to do it is, here. And I know lots of companies post jobs, as sort of a, kind of a hip fake to their competitors. It's like, oh, let's post, that we're hiring 20 data scientists, so that people who are trolling our job postings to see what our strategy for the next couple of years is go, oh, they're focusing on, data analytics. And so I do think that there is this business strategy approach to what are we doing here, and like, what do we want people to think we're paying, what's going to get us the best candidates. And, and again, I do stick by the vast majority of people coming in for jobs aren't actually coming in through what we think are normal channels. They're people who are looking for a new job, and they reach out to their network and say, hey, Russ, do you have any, product management jobs over there at PayScale?
Right.
And you like, here's my resume. And so, it's all happening kind of, sidebar offline. There is no job posting necessarily for that job or for whatever that person's looking for. So I do think that, that everybody's trying to figure out how to use this system. And, and at the end of the day, it's like, it does provide some control for the company to limit salaries, because if you say, you can point to something, if you do a reasonable, not tight range, but tighter range that's reasonable around your job, you say, somebody comes in, and we all know there's somebody that's going to come in, and the range is, 75 to 100, and they're like, I need 120, or I can't go. And it's like, oh, this is the best candidate we found. You do this back and forth, and eventually somebody caves and says, all right, we'll give them 120. And here we can say, well, we had to put a good faith, this is the range, and you can point to that and say, sorry, we're capped out at 100, and you have like documentation, as opposed to, let's just say 5 years ago, where we would all say that, and everybody knows, well, is that true? Or, both sides are questioning whether or not that's a true statement. And I think what'll happen is we'll start to see jobs settling into, basically base pay levels. This is a 50K job, this is a 60K job, that's a 75K job. And the differences are going to be made up in variable pay, performance-based, which if well structured and well done, is like actually probably a better outcome. So you're not nickel and diming on base pay all the time, and you have fairness, and you just need a fair variable pay program. And
that's actually
interesting.
That's an interesting segue, because Vicky, I wanted to ask you about this when we were talking about structures, and then Bill just went there directly, which is we've been really focusing on base pay, but it seems to me some of these laws are also starting to think about, usually the smaller ones, but also starting to hint at, hey, we also want you to see your benefits. We also want to see bonus structures. And so do we think this is going to, these transparency requirements, or these rules are going to bleed into beyond base, so that you can't sort of sidestep it the way Bill just, I don't know if sidestep is the right way. I mean, I think, Bill, you're right. Moving things to bonus structures better for a bunch of reasons, but it also sort of screens maybe pay equality issues. What's your reaction to that, Vicky? Do you think there's going to be more legislation to have other kinds of comp and benefits also exposed?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think, but Bill's actually right, and we'll end up with kind of more fixed base and then move into variable, which I agree is probably a better way anyway. But we know that your postings in the New York legislation, the postings are also asking for a general description of other comp offered. And some, I think the California laws are asking for a bit more than that as well. And I think it will be important for companies to post a lot of that information, and also benefits that are not like financial benefits, flexible working or kind of 4-day week, things that maybe are fruit and veg in the office if you come,
Right.
free food in the office, because that's what lots of people are doing, aren't they? Because I do think that if you end up with these kind of sort of more fixed base pay, then you might end up with the same ranges across different companies in the same place. Like, I mean, you'd hope there's not going to be any kind of fixed, any price fixing going on. But, if it's like, well, a software engineer is 65K for this level and 75K or whatever it is for that level, you might end up being like, well, I have to attract them. It's more about all the other things. There's also the issue of whether or not then you say, well, it has to be that case that you were talking about, it has to be 100 grand, but we'll give you a 20 grand signing on bonus, that sort of thing, which will only come out when you're starting to have to do the reporting that you were talking about, where you're actually going to have to provide information about what you actually have paid people. And so that's where that's going to come out rather than in this legislation. Just another thing.
Just one more thing to worry about. I know there's so much. And then Bill, you mentioned something else too that I kind of wanted to jump on too. And I think you're absolutely right, Vicky, right? Like we need to think beyond just base, right? It's all going to be eventually, which is good from a pay transparency point of view, but it's also a lot of work to get all that right. One other thing, Bill, I wanted to jump on. You mentioned other ways to recruit than job boards to kind of work around this. And I hadn't really thought about this, but a lot of times laws have unintended consequences. And this could be one of those things where companies start to more aggressively recruit in the methodologies that don't require the use of job boards, like job fairs or intern to hire, or like you suggested, LinkedIn relationships. I thought that was sort of interesting. I'm really curious. I don't know how we can get metrics on that, but I'd be really curious to see if job postings reduce slightly as a result of this, overall. It's kind of interesting.
Go for it.
Sorry, I'll go. Although Vicky, drink some tea or something, because it's going to be a while.
Oh no.
The metrics do exist, although I don't have them at my fingertips. But it is, it's a lot lower than you think about what goes through like job boards, classified ads, those things. I'm recalling talking like 25%, 30% of hires come through that kind of avenue, and the rest come through, walk through the front door or through networking, or like jobs are invented for people, for candidates that come in. But I think it's the whole thing is going to change how companies go and find people. Maybe, although I don't think like this transparency stuff it's not a problem per se. It's also not a solution. Like, it's not really going to do a whole lot, unless it's just, which I think it is, just a first step towards other things. But, if we go down the path, like Vicky was saying about other benefits and other forms of comp and things, which are all clear, the challenge there becomes it's not really about internal equity with a lot of those things. That's about external, like, market comparisons, which, I've been doing like total comp statements, total rewards, valuation of total rewards, my entire career. And it's awful. It's a nightmare because, many of these things can't be valued or can't be, valued in a way that's consistent and logical. Like, how do you value a stock option in a startup? Nobody has a good one. People tell you, oh, Black-Scholes. That's, Black-Scholes is absurd. You can't value an option higher than its strike price. So it's like, that's not what those startup options are perceived to be. benefits, most benefits, all ERISA benefits, are already, internal equity. You can't give, women a different 401k plan than men, or, you just can't do it. So that they are internally equitable, but is it the same, versus your competitors? And then, how do you value, different kinds of matching schemes or whatever? Commission plans, similarly, they're the same thing. Commission plans opens up a whole different internal equity problem, which is, the commission plans are almost always the same for people selling the same thing. However, territories or who they're allowed to sell to aren't. So you can, you can favor or disfavor certain people by giving them a good territory or a bad territory. Good luck in valuing that, or, in determining, which is a better sales territory, New York City or San Francisco. I mean, I guarantee you everybody's going to say something different about that. So anyway, I think there's a lot of these things that just become very challenging. And again, I'm not sure what problem they're solving when you start digging into them and think of, I don't want to be demeaning, your average employee is the more information you give them, is that really more transparency or is it more confusion? And I think, at some point a lot of people, very justifiably, they just want to get a new job, and they don't want to, they don't want to have to take an SAT test in, order to figure out which job is the right one. They just want to find a good company that pays them well and gives them, treats them fairly. So I think we have to make it easier for the customer, which in this case is the job seeker.
I think that's right. Vicky, anything to add? I know you want to jump in there at the same time.
No, that's I can't remember what I was going to say. Probably nothing important. But no, I think that Bill's right. It's the point is you're trying to, from this point of view, you're trying to sell to the job seeker, and so it's what is the best thing, and to make it. And all of this makes me think. You mentioned, Bill, is about making it simpler, and I feel like that's one of the main, not necessarily aims of this, because who knows what they were thinking, but something that I think is going to be maybe one of the main outcomes that could come is that actually things are made more simpler, and so compensation is simpler, and so people can understand why they're paid, why they are, what they could be paid if they did something else, and actually all the benefits and all of that, it could be simpler. But you're completely right that the valuing, I used to work on flexible benefit schemes, and the valuing of benefits is just really hard, and it's different. The value of a benefit is different to different people at different times, right? Your medical
absolutely
has an amount, but it's of huge value to someone who's got a sick child, and is not of big value to someone who's healthy and doesn't have any dependents, until suddenly it's the same with parental leave, and these things are not that valuable until they're very valuable. And so I think people understanding that you've got to also put the person in it, and what that value is to them individually, and it will be different for every single job seeker.
Yeah,
I think to take a Vicky word, I think that's brilliant, that point. And I used to use it all the time. It's if you're hiring, and I do mean this specifically, if you're hiring, college graduate men, right out of school, and you tell them how great your medical coverage is and how much money you're spending on it, they don't care. They don't go to the doctor. They don't, they're indestructible. Being a little sarcastic, but that's the mindset, and so you can put all the stuff in your job posting you want about the value of that benefit. It's meaningless to them, and then, to older workers, people who have families and things, that is, sometimes more important than the difference, a few $1,000s difference between in base pay. And so, yes, it is like the value is the value to the customer, and it is a sales, job postings are, marketing and sales materials. And, are they targeted? No, but should they be? Yeah. I think that's a great point.
And that's a great place to end on it, which is really that you got to think about the employee, the applicant, think about what's special to them. And then I think one other thing we can leave folks with is, as you're thinking about how to prepare for this, and we talked about a lot of different things today with structures and reevaluating your J differentials and all these other things. I think one of the most critical things you can also probably do is talk to your existing employees, make sure they understand your comp philosophy, make sure they understand why they're paid what they're paid. So as these numbers start to go out on the internet, they have confidence that they're being treated fairly and being thought of just as much as those new hires are going to be as well. So, well, thank you, Bill and Vicky, and thank you all for listening. That's what we think about some of the. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Bill. Do you have a last thought?
I was going to say Vicky was going to jump in, and so was I. Vicky, I think she had a response to your closing comment.
Sorry, I just inserted the last thing and then tried to duck out, so I apologize. Go ahead, Vicky.
I was just completely agreeing.
Yes, I was going to completely agree. Also, in saying that's it's a great summary, and also the idea of communicating job postings is actually that's a big hit over the head to communicate to your existing employees.
That's right.
Don't forget them, because they're also reading that stuff, as you said, Russ. And if you just start posting salary ranges in your job postings, you're going to have lots of conversations, lots of turmoil inside the organization. And so you should get ahead of that. That's also brilliant, even though you're not in the UK.
So we are so it's good to know that we are all in agreement on this, but are you, our listener, in agreement? If you're not, if you want to share some stuff with us, please do. You can email us at coffee@payscale.com or reach out to us on Twitter via @payscale. Thanks for listening and have some great coffee this morning. And thanks for joining us on Comp and Coffee. Comp and Coffee is a PayScale production dedicated to the compensation community. We welcome your feedback. Send email to coffee@payscale.com, tweet us @payscale, or share your thoughts in our PayScale Connect community. Until next time, keep your coffee hot and your data fresh.